In today's video, I finish up my Skinks for my Lizardmen collection in Warhammer Fantasy. So these little guys are the Skinks of the Lizardmen army. Skinks are the smallest of the Lizardmen races, from the Kroxigor being the biggest, Saurus being the middle size, and the Skinks being the smallest. These little guys have been running around my collection for a while, ever since I first got into Lizardmen, but I never finished painting them up. Today, I will be finishing them up, along with some other characters as well. I have this guy, which is a Skink Chief with a shield and spear, and I have this guy, which is a Skink Priest with a staff and a dagger. These kits I think came off the Stegodon kit. You could put them on the Stegodon, as the Skink can take Stegodons as mounts. And then I have this guy. This guy's a really cool sculpt. He is, I think, still purchasable in the Games Workshop's website. He is another Skink Priest. I'll probably be running him as a high-level wizard and be painting him up too. I'm really looking forward to him. I have some ideas for the feathers. So when it comes to the paint scheme for my Skinks, I'm going to do the same thing I did with my Saurus Warriors. I'm going to be keeping the blues and a lot of the paints for the weapons and the shields relatively the same. So first off, I'm going to brighten up the color of them by taking Citadel Altdorf Blue, giving them a good coat. And then once that is done, I will use Army Painter Leather Brown for the inside of the shield. I'm going to brighten up the shield color by using Army Painter Dragon Red. And I forgot to record it, but the other color of the shields, I will be using Citadel's Troll Slayer Orange and Citadel's Moot Green in order to get a strong color on them. On the staff, same thing for the wood. I'm using Citadel Rhinox Hide. For the tip of the spear, I will be coloring it again with Citadel Abaddon Black, going back over the wood after it dries with Mahogany Brown from Vallejo. For the detail bits on the spear, I will be using Army Painter Weapon Bronze. And other details like these little dangly bits on the shield, I will be going over with Weapon Bronze as well. Skinks don't have the same armor that the Lizardmen do, so I will not be painting any armor pieces. But they do have, I will be doing the exact same thing on the claws. I will be putting on Citadel's Screaming Skull. One little dot on its eye with Army Painter Dragon Red. And then leather bits I will be going over with Army Painter Leather Brown, such as his little wristband here. And that is pretty much it. I wanted to keep these guys very simple and easy to do because they are kind of tiny and small. So what I'll do is I'm going to focus a little bit more on the characters. So with this guy, kind of the basics again. I'm going to be touching him up with the Altdorf Blue, and then his shield is red, so Dragon Red from Army Painter. Back of the shield with the Leather Brown. Bits on the shield with Weapon Bronze. So for his helmet, the Skink Chief has a little bit of armor. What I've decided to do is go with Weapon Bronze for his helmet, completely coating in it. And as you can see, a little bit of paint on his tail as well. For his spear, I do the exact same thing as with any other spear I've done so far. Rhinox Hide, and then the Mahogany Brown. As I work through this model, I'm touching up and trying to get as much as the detailed bits as possible. He's got a lot of bit of details on him here and there. I do like these little fiddly bits on models. I think they're fun. Kinda is tedious to paint a whole bunch of them on especially the larger units, but on characters I really like a lot of detail, like pieces like this scattered throughout. Kinda makes the models unique in my opinion. So next he has this little pouch on his front. I'm gonna go ahead and paint it leather brown as well. And use a fine tip brush, try to grab the leather belt or cord wrapping around his back. My hands aren't super steady. I really try to brace my wrists and my arms against the desk whenever I'm handling models like this, so that way I can kind of finely paint those pieces that are a little harder to get. I've noticed that that has worked for me in the past. I can't do that a lot very often. Although I do kind of wonder, how do other people? Do you guys have issues painting finer detail stuff, especially with small tip brushes? I don't use a lot of finer tip brushes, but I'm starting to increasing my collection of them so I can start doing finer work on miniatures. So next, because his mouth is open, I'm going to paint up his tongue with Dragon Red. Citadel Screaming Skull for his claws on his feet. And I'm also going to be using the Screaming Skull to paint the skulls on this model as well. Brushing back over very gently, kind of just running the tip of the brush along its teeth. Seeing if I can get them without having to do each one individually. This didn't work out exactly the way I wanted to, but I feel like it got the job done. Either way, what I'll do is I'll go back over with Army Painter's Dark Tone Wash and give it the same definition that I did with some of the Saurus Warriors to make the mouth pop out a little more, hide some of the extra paint left behind. So for the feathers on his head, all the feathers I want in my army to kind of make the army very colorful, and what I've elected to do is start with Citadel Moot Green for the big feather on the bottom. And then after that, use Citadel's Phalanx Yellow to paint the smaller feather on top. At least I think it's a big feather on the bottom and the small feather on top. So one of the things I really like about the Lizardmen army is that there's such a wide variety of colors that you can do to really make the models in the army really stand out and pop. I also go back over with that dark tone wash, kind of hitting some of the details like the skull and the pouch, hopefully to give it some definition, and the skull on the top. As well as go over the skull, or go over the feathers with the dark tone wash to give them some definition too. And that's it. I think he's completed. Looks pretty cool. And now moving on to the Skink Priest. So for the Skink Priest, I kind of been looking at his staff. His staff has a lot of intricate details. I think that it probably looked best if I painted majority of the staff in wood. Or it's supposed to be a carved chunk of wood into the shape of a staff. So for the staff details, like the head and the bottom, I'm using weapons bronze for the details. While I was doing that, I decided that instead of doing a black weapon to represent the obsidian weapons the Lizardmen use, I don't know why, to give him some variation, I decided to give him a fully bronze dagger. Finishing up the staff, this top section right here in the middle is going to be wood, so I'm coating over it with Rhinox hide, and then outside it I'm going to start painting a weapon of bronze. But before then, I go over the skull with Citadel Screaming Skull. And while I have the paint out, I figured I would paint each one of his claws. The skull on the top of his head is also going to be painted the same color, and I want to try something with his tabard. I'm going to start with Screaming Skull as the base layer for this, and then I'll touch it up later with a brighter white. So letting those dry, I pull back out the weapon bronze and start working back on the details on the staff. Next I go over his necklace, or this ceremonial looking necklace, as well as the jewelry bits scattered on his person. With his mouth open, I again use Dragon Red to coat his tongue, Screaming Skull for his teeth, and then the wash over, just like with the rest. Now that's done, back to the tabard. So I take Army Painter Matte White, and I'm going back over the tabard to give it a stronger tone. I don't want it to be pure white, but I want to try this technique that I've done before, where if I want a stronger white on a miniature, I will use a tan or a cream color underneath it. And do this for the back as well. Once I'm done with that, I go back over these little details on his belt. And the same with every skull I've done in the video so far. Same thing with the skull in the middle. I'm assuming this isn't a bronze skull, and I'm assuming this is a normal human skull that this skink has taken and decided to put as a belt buckle, which is a pretty metal belt buckle. As I'm painting him, I notice that there's some spots of him that could use a little bit of touch-up, so I go back through, kind of paint those back up. And now painting the feathers, I went with the Phalanx Yellow and the Moot Green. And there he is completed. So the Skink Priest, I tried to keep it as simple. And now on to the big guy. This guy, I've been really looking forward to painting him. It seems like the details are a lot sharper on this guy, and overall, despite the fact that he is a much bigger miniature compared to the other skinks, he is a really cool looking miniature, and I feel like there is some simplicity in his design. So trying to keep to my paint style, which is a simple, colorful, and just getting paint on the model. I strengthen his blue skin, and then I'm going to start with the decorative elements. I'm going to start with his helmet. It looks like he's wearing this helmet with the decorated feather on top. And then I start working on the base of the staff. I'm going to do the majority of the staff in bronze. Now I noticed as I'm painting him, my paint was a little thin, so what I'm going to do is I'm trying to cover it as much as I can, and then I will go back over and do a second layer. I've never tried true metallic metals like a lot of people have done online. One of the things I know that's always worked for me is to give metallic paint a little better, always thin it out a bit, and then try again with a second or third coat. Sometimes with the weapon bronze, if I put it on too thick, it's very globbish. However, once I go back through with the second coat, it tends to thicken up. It tends to get a better coverage. So I always aim for light, thinner coats when it comes to the metallics. So once I finished up painting all the little bronze details and finished up the staff, I'm now going to his back. And this dagger back here, whether ceremonial or not, I decided to paint in obsidian. So like before with the skink characters, there's a lot of little details, and I'm trying to make sure I grab these pieces of, I'm assuming leather or something, that dangled the little bits of decoration from his arms. I'm trying to use my finest tip brush, carefully going back over those. And then I'm going to paint the leather handle, or I'm going to paint the details on the dagger as well. Alright, I'm making progress on this guy, and I'm liking how he's looking so far. So, to the favorite part that I've wanted to do on this miniature for a long time, paint the feathers. Pulling out the dragon red, I'm going to start with the feather on his helmet, start painting that down. I wanted to have some color variation with this feather. So I'm going to leave the red off for now, and I'm going to work down the ones in his shoulders. So I want this symmetrical. So the first two are going to be orange, painted with Citadel's Trollslayer orange. The next feather I will be using Citadel's Phalanx Yellow. I know that yellow has been widely known to be very hard to paint with. I try my best, and normally for yellows I tend to do a thicker coat on, or going back over with a second or third coat. I try to paint with my paints thin anyways, but I notice that yellows always has a harder time. On another project I will show that when I'm painting yellow, it's definitely a lot harder, and I had to go back over those twice or three times. I have several yellows in my collections, and trying to find the best one that covered the most was going to be very difficult. For the feather, the other color that I'll be painting it is yellow, so I finish up the feather on his head. And the last color is going to be Moot Green. I'm getting these feathers that hang down from the rest of his decorations as well in the same colors. I definitely liked the tropical bird feel with these feathers. Painting the skull, the eye, and his claws in the same way that I've done with the rest of the models in this project so far. I would say he's complete. Now he's just ready for the basing. The cool part is that this model is already based, so all I have to do is just paint it up. So what I do is I'm going to be trying something new. I went out and bought a new paint recently called Pro Acryl Dark Umber. I've never painted with Pro Acryls paints before, but my local game store does keep it in stock, and I wanted a larger bottle to paint with because this is well over 20 ounces, and I think the Games Workshop bottles are 16 ounces. Since I'm going to be doing all the basing in the same color, I would rather, instead of spending an extra 50 cents for about 6 ounces less, I decided to save a couple of pennies and get a much larger paint bottle that I would rather use to paint the bases with, and save the Citadel Rhinox hide for the miniatures. After I give it a good coat, I then use Citadel's Skaven Blight Dinge to go over the rocks he's standing on. This will be the base layer. Once that finishes, I paint up the skull that's on the base of the model. I'm using Army Painter's Dark Tone Wash to go over the base, making it feel dirty, and covering it up with a good grime. And then I'm going to be dry brushing Army Painter's Ash Gray along its edges of the stone. This I hope will create a much more stony look, make it a lot more rougher. For the rest of the army, I'm going to have to be basing them, and this time I'm going to try something a little different than I did in my last video. Using this drywall compound in my last video, I slapped it on the base of the miniatures and then painted over it. What I'm going to do this time is I'm going to try and put paint and the texture in it first before I put it on the model. Now, unfortunately, when I was pouring the sand, the ballast, into the drywall, I spilled just a little bit. Had to clean it up. And then taking the Pro Acryl, I'm going to pour a couple of droplets in it. Once that is done, I'm going to be taking my modeling tool and stir the entire thing together. Now, this is something I've never tried before, and it kind of worked. Once it really started mixing well, it started getting a texture that I liked a lot more. But it was also super hard to get it to the consistency that I really wanted it. I had to do a lot of stirring. And after everything was done, I still found, when putting it on the model, still specks of pink that would eventually dry white. But this did save me a lot of time doing it this way. Took my first skink and started applying the compound to it. Once it was on, I took the Pro Acryl's Dark Umber, went along the sides. It got close enough to the dirt tone I was looking for, I just went back over and splotched some paint on. Now this worked really good in a few ways. It definitely doesn't flake off, and when the paint does chip off, all of a sudden there's a little bit of white remaining on the model. This actually stayed really good. One of the things to be aware though, if you decide to copy this for yourself, be completely aware that this does take a lot longer to dry. In fact, when I'm putting the glue on to put the flock on, I'm putting the glue over the wet surface of the paste mixture that I used. So just putting on a little bit of flocking. I'm not going to do any of the tufts like I did with the Source Warriors, because I still have these on 20mm bases, and I don't think there's just enough room for it. So once I shake the excess off, this guy should be done, and I present to you my Skink Warriors are completed. I'm definitely going to go back over some of these guys, especially if you see the bases. The bases aren't as quite nice as I intended to be. Take my thumb across them and clean them up a little bit. But besides that, I think they came out pretty good. They're on a movement tray just as the Source Warriors, and I did that completely the same way. So if anyone wants to check it out, in my previous video, the 50 Source Warriors, I took some plastic card, cut it down to size, made some trims at 2mm, and made movement trays for my models. So I'm really liking how these guys turned out. They turned out very similar to my previous Source Warriors, and I think I've gotten enough infantry done for right now. I'm going to start painting on something different. And here is my Skink Priests. So kind of how I talked in the last video, I'm not a very good painter, and I'm slowly growing my skills and comfort. I'm trying to get miniatures on the tabletop that have a good amount of paint on them. So with that being said, I'm glad that these guys turned out right, but I am kind of starting to look at my miniatures now and realizing that I would like to put a little more detail into some of them. So with my next project, I would like to try to find areas where I could either try different techniques, figuring out how to do layering or blending or something, to make them stand out just a little bit more. But I am trying to finish up my backlog. Let me know if any of you guys are painting Warhammer the Old World minis or Warhammer Fantasy miniatures for different projects. Let me know how your backlog or your miniatures is coming along. So thank you so much for watching this video, I appreciate it, and until the next upload, I hope you all have a wonderful day.